Hello, 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 and welcome to our first book circle for 2026. Super excited to be in this space once again with Marcia Nordmeyer. And I'm wondering if everyone would just say, where in the world they're joining the book circle from today.
Hello from Lincoln, Nebraska.
Good morning from Melbourne, Australia. Good morning
Hello,
from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm in San Luis Obispo,
Good
California.
morning from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm in San Luis Obispo,
Good
California.
morning from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm in San Luis Obispo,
Good
California.
morning from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm in Columbia, Maryland.
I'm in San Luis Obispo,
Good
California.
morning from Melbourne, Australia.
And I am broadcasting from Montego Bay, Jamaica. Yay!
Yeah,
so this Yeah, man. So this afternoon, evening, and morning for some of us, we are engaging in a book that one of my pastors recommended. And I hope he gets to watch this at some point because he recommended this book. Marcia, I was frustrated that he recommended this book. I haven't even had a chance to talk to him about the book. And then Greg, you and I chatted a little bit about the book. And then I told Chris and Moy they had to read the book. And that's why we're all here this afternoon. And the book, drumroll please, is Omar El Akkad's One Day Everyone will have always been against this. So, because it's a National Book Award winner, we knew that this book would be excellent. However, I'm wondering what surprised you most about the book?
Excellent. I can jump in if that's okay. I think I shouldn't have been surprised, but I think given Omar, his background, and I guess his own lived experience, um, what surprised me most wasn't his political arguments, because I think in some ways I went into the book expecting that, but it was his deep vulnerability. It almost felt like I was listening to him um, express through the book, and maybe because I was also listening to it rather than reading, such personal grief and almost like the moral exhaustion that came through. And I think in some ways it felt like in real time, not just his moral. And I think in some ways it felt almost like the collapse of moral imagination. And I think the other part that I was struck by is how he names the quiet complicity of good people. But I think in that way, I wasn't really surprised because that's what we're all experiencing as well. And it was confronting. And I think it's really easy for all of us to critique and criticize like governments and institutions. But it was, yeah, I guess the way that he brought out for him his sadness about good people like us who benefit from the systems that we claim to oppose and yet are really silent about it. And that's a tension that I guess it stayed with me and surprised me how it did.
I was surprised and I guess not surprised, but a little delighted that he's kind of an equal opportunity uh, outrage giver, shake of the finger at all of us. He's not one to pretend that one side of Western government ideology is perfect and the other side is bad. Um, he's here to remind us all that we are not. Neither side is 100% on the correct side of history, and that we can all take a moment to step back and change our shoes once in a while. And I think changing shoes is a good idea.
I mean, I think for me the book was particularly affecting, shocking. I am not persuaded easily by the things I read. Um, I in my life I hold a tension between being a pragmatist and being an idealist. Um, but I think the book left in tatters some of the ideas I have. I'm a practicing lawyer. So Western liberalism, I exist in a system, right, that rests on the equality of justice for all, but I also exist in a system as a Black man and an immigrant in the United States. And so while I exist in a system and operate by certain rules, I have seen in disparate treatment I've experienced at corporate level, at walking down the street, in movement through life, in police stops. And so that tension has always existed in my life. And so to see systems currently brought down in the kind of regime that currently exists in the US is shocking. But for him to point directly and say, well, no, this entire edifice was all built on something. And it was not morality and truth. It's this idea of self serving, which, in the Christian framework, we understand that. And, it's almost like Old Testament style: woe unto you, woe unto you, woe unto you, woe unto you. So I think that was shocking for me because of how much of I felt it shifts my belief in a system that I operate in, benefit from, um, even though I've always had the tension in that system.
I'm having some echolalia going on my computer. I'm hoping that doesn't come through that way. I'm having some echolalia going on my computer. I'm hoping that doesn't come through that way.
Okay, let's see if we can figure out what's going on with that, Chris. Um, I think it seems I too am plagued by the same thing. Carry on and talk amongst yourself. I'm going to step out and come back.
I think the other thing that really caused me to sit and think deeply, well, I didn't echo before, but now I am, was the idea of the protest vote, and the disengagement from systems of immorality and oppression, because we live in this world and this world is what it is, and so to live in it and be untainted from its systems, from the devices we use, the clothes we wear, the cotton we buy, it's tough. But his confrontation of the reality at how many compromises is too many compromises, and what does that do? And I think his posture at the end when he says the desire to compromise and look away strengthens that desire. Every time you make that decision, it strengthens that part. Just like every time you make the decision to have courage, strengthen that. Years ago, I was 21 and I was a teacher. And I used to do kind of a brief devotional with my students. And I remember one devotional, and this is now 24 years ago, and it said, when someone stands up, it strengthens the other people in the room. You know, the courage of one allows other people to say, if that person can have courage, I can be strong too. Um, and it was interesting because he talks about Dearborn, Michigan, and Dearborn having the largest Arab population in the United States, and the madness of certain people calling it a jihadi town. And his response was like, well, if it was that, what would the response be? The response would be what it is in other parts of the world, a military response. But clearly it's not that. The purpose is to dehumanize and to create fear. But he says, in that place, outside of any other place in the United States, I feel love, right? I feel the sense of warmth and welcoming in a community. And yeah, it's, so I bring that up because I think I remember, maybe it was the mayor of Dearborn, um, or certain members of the political group there that turned away from the president, the former president, and his support for Israel. Um, and, that moral position came with extreme cost for them. Um, but it's a legitimate position for people to make, and saying that's the tension he has in the book where he says, how bad do you have to be? Right? So that people will say, you know what? I'm going to go with the fascist. Not because, or I will disengage from the system and allow the fascists to win. Right? Because this is not something I can abide. Um, yeah. Yeah. It's very eye opening.
I think I struggled with the book not because the book wasn't good. I struggled with the book because it was a mirror. And I sat with a lot of grief around the title of the book. This idea that years from now, we're going to have our moral compass is going to be aligned appropriately. And the tension for me is why not now? Right. And as I locate myself as a Afro-Caribbean American woman who sits in that tension of how I'm judged when I walk into rooms and having to think about, is it okay for me to, I don't necessarily think about whether it's okay for me to speak up or not, just knowing, as Gregory said, there is a cost for my speaking, right? Because I'm not silent by any least of the imagination in most spaces that I'm in. However, there is a cost for me to speak up in this body. And so as I listened to the book, which is why I said I had tension, I haven't even accosted my pastor. I just looked at him and said, "My guy, you tell me to read this book. Like, we need to have some serious conversations about what El Akkad states." And this is the second book I've listened to this year, or I listened to, that was written with a Middle Eastern voice. And I so appreciated the opportunity to hear the story from a native person, even though El Akkad is from Egypt, but this idea that he belongs to this particular community, religiously and ethnically, right? And so that for me was a tension in the first go around because Marcia, I know I have to go through this book again, right? I know this is not a one and done. Richard, like,
No, it's not. And
go ahead.
honestly, when this book was in pre-publications, in my line of work, I get a heads up that it's coming out.
Hmm.
And I didn't see a cover or anything. I just saw the title, and my initial assumption was that it was about the United States and what's happening in the United States. And I'm like, add to cart. I'm gonna, pre-order that. And I had no idea that it was not about what happened in 2016 in the United States. And so, then I read the summary of the book, and I'm like, oh, this is about another part of the world. Like, imagine that. Hard things happening all over the place. It's not centered around me. What? Um, the revolutionary concept that the world doesn't revolve around me, but there we have it, friends.
I think what now that I'm out of the echo chamber, uh, I think what really surprised me was so much excellence in this book. Uh, so many quotable and infuriating and horrifying passages with such superb writing. Um, and I mean, how many times do you get a book where the title alone is a manifesto? You know, it's just brilliant. And the other thing I think was surprising was how he took the progressive, liberal establishments to task so heartily and so well. That was surprising, and I have to say, sort of comforting for me because I've been horrified and infuriated as well. But he breaks it down. He breaks it down not only in Gaza, but also Guantanamo Bay and Afghanistan and other places around the world. And that showing, he's a journalist. He shows. He doesn't just tell, and it's just brilliant. Anyway.
So I have to comment on the fact that Chris is gushing about a book. It doesn't we need to say for the people who do not know who Chris Blake is that he is a journalist by training. He's an editor, he's a writer. So one day maybe Chris will gush about something I write like that. I'm just dreaming that that might be a possibility. I felt the bar raised, y'all.
Uh, yeah, it is pretty high bar, uh, and he has a high bar as well, which is what he brings out. The journalists that are not doing the job that they should be doing, and the ones that are being killed. The Palestinian journalists are being killed, and that's equally infuriating. So and horrifying.
Yeah, there's a passage where he eviscerates one of the New York Times columnists when he talks about him referring to Iranians as wasp
Mm-hmm.
insects. And I knew exactly, I remember the reference that under the genocide in Rwanda, the reference to people as cockroaches, and what that led to. And it's something I always push back against when people, no matter how heinous their actions, are dehumanized and referred to as things, whether it's pigs for slaughter. The reference is there, the intimation is there. And then he goes into this dance that people often do, that because someone sits in a seat of power or they have a position,
Yeah.
that their words, you must have misconstrued them.
Yes.
It's not what it is, right? Because of their position and status. And, I read a book by a prominent lawyer years ago. And chapter one of that book, I always took with me. He says, just because everything seems okay and the status or the power, everything doesn't mean it's okay. And the
Yeah.
chapter that was called You Could Be Wrong. So this person sits in
Mm.
this position of power and authority, and everything is deferred to them because they write for the paper of record, the gray lady. And so what they say, they have awards. So surely they cannot mean when they reference and say people are wasps, that an entire group of people, millions of people, right, are like insects, right? And, wasps are kind of akin to vermin, you
Mhm.
know? And he says, it can't be, but it is, right?
Yes.
And we need to call it out and say it for what it is. It's kind
Mhm.
of like for me in the Christian setting when Jesus says to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan,
Yeah.
right? It is not in the person, it is in the act, you know?
Mhm.
I may be XYZ, I may have XYZ status, but I can commit a heinous act, right? That is worthy of condemnation, right? And he says that. But that goes in that in group, out group tension that permeates the entire book. Him as an Arab man outsider, or when his father gets stopped by the police in Egypt, right? There's these moments where you could be in or out, and being out can come with severe consequences for people. And being out means you're less human, your children matter less, your starvation matters less, your lives matter less. So the case when he said to me, and I didn't know the numbers, when several of the Western nations defunded the UN arm um, of the Palestinian Human Rights Group, and he gave me the numbers. He said that group has about 20,000 workers, and a couple dozen were accused of that, and so hundreds of thousands should starve.
Yeah.
Powerful people make these decisions like that, but they'll never have to experience the consequences. And I'm like, the numbers alone struck me because it's that idea of taint. And this is what's really the idea that the collective punishment is evil,
That's
right?
right.
And
Yeah.
this is the idea and the tension in this war where so many people have had to contort their ideas and their principles. And he says their consciences, because later on, I don't know if you remember, towards the end of the book, he says, there'll be a moment in the future when people are alone with their consciences,
Mhm.
right? And there's just going to be silence.
Yeah.
You know.
Mhm. Um, as you were talking, Gregory, I couldn't help but think of, this idea of dehumanization and Auntie Brene Brown. um, she talks about how for humans to be able to commit the most heinous of acts against other humans, we have to dehumanize them.
Yes.
Cockroaches are to be stomped on.
That's right.
You know, wasps are to be swatted, or get rid. The whole entire hive has to be gotten rid of. And it's so fascinating in the sense that he brings that up because it is what has justified the collective punishment, because Palestinians are not regarded as humans. You know, every genocide, every form of horrendous annihilation of people groups has been because humans have gotten to a point, or people in power have gotten to a point where they've said, what human?
Mhm.
Slavery. What human? And so I think the dehumanization level uh, is one of the most, well, I want to say evil, but
It is evil.
it
Use
is
that.
evil,
Yeah.
spaces that we can get to
Yeah.
for us to justify the acts that we commit. And I say we because this is part of the conversation that we're having, and the complicity, all of it. And so, yeah, so I could not help but think about that every time. Every time you label a people group anything other than the image of God, you can be excused for all kinds of acts. And we're witnessing that. So,
Yeah.
And one of the things I remind my kids of is even the evil people are people who are making horrendous choices. And we can't dehumanize them either. And that's hard to do. Um,
Yeah, I think that idea, and I think about this all the time, that idea of imago Dei, it acts as a hedge against the human heart,
Yep.
right? Because when you breach that barrier, as most styles, anything goes. But when that barrier is in place, and Jesus's words become flesh, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Why? Because they're just like you,
Yep.
right? And that idea, that tension, and had to teach Bible class recently, and I was talking about the tension that we have and the gift that we have as human beings in being created and being redeemed. That creates this box around what we can and what we ought to do to others. We recognize the shared creation. I'm a creature, you're a creature. So there's a subordination there, right? Um, I cannot exist above you. I have to look above. And then human depravity and the cross, the great equalizer. So that tension where I want to exalt myself, but the cross says, no, I cannot. I am just like you. I need a savior. And so that Christianity should act as a bracket around human evil. But in the movement that we have, because much of the evil that's done, when you step back, many of these people, they have a profession of faith. The Christian nationalist movement in the world today, and on the rise and still rising in the US at the highest levels of government, they have a form of godliness. But I think the transformative power that allows people to say, you know, you are my brother, you are my sister, is absent. And I think that reveals that there's something rotten at the core of the tree because the fruit is rotten.
I remember reading a United States general's comment that the first act of war is to dehumanize the enemy, to make the enemy seem something other than human, so that when you kill this, you're not going to think twice. And the author brings up numerous examples. One of them was Nikki Haley, who was the South Carolina governor, who said two words: "Finish them." And encompassed in those two words is kill children, starve people, stop aid trucks, bomb hospitals multiple times. When the rescue workers come, bomb them as well. Strew limbs of infants across fields, Finish them encompasses all that in the way that Mark Twain talks about in the War Prayer, which is a brilliant piece, and I highly recommend it for people. Read the War Prayer. It's a it's short essay about what's embodied in bring us victory in war. When Mike Pence is signing his name on the side of bombs, wow.
He's that pro-life guy, right?
Yeah, there you
Okay,
go.
just wanted to double check that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
When
okay.
and yeah, thanks, Marcia. And
You're welcome.
when Akkad talks about we're watching films about snipers when we ought to be uh, making and watching films about the people who are in the scopes. The perspective that we bring, it's just it's harrowing, and it's also yeah, it's also enlightening to bring this up.
I think what's coming up for me as I'm listening to us reflect on the intentional dehumanization of folks and our basic tenets of Christianity is the push against point of view, right? You know, when we think about what has been challenged in the last 3 to 4 years, it was we pushed back against critical race theory. We pushed back against standpoint theory. We pushed back against people's lived experiences, and we want to say no, your story isn't true, which is so dissonant, right? Because I'm going, I'm living this right now. Like, this is happening to me right now, and you're trying to tell me that my lived experience isn't valid and it isn't valuable. And I think one of the ways we get to push back, as El Akkad asks us to do, is to see things from the perspective of the people. And why I'm so thankful that these books are coming across my Marcia, I'm not like you. I don't get previews on books. Not really. Well, I mean, I might, but not the way you do as a librarian. I'm just so
I
thankful,
can
though.
forward emails to you, Dillis.
Oh, Chris will tell you don't. I'm not going to read it in a timely manner. But actually, if you put it in a digest, I'll probably look at it quicker than if you sent it to me individually.
Yeah.
But this invitation to really ask the question, what if this was my family? This was my mother, my brother, my sister. Would I be okay with it? And I think that's why I struggled, because I'm like, I don't want this to be one day we're gonna look back. I want it to be right now, y'all. Like, I need us right now to be saying this is not okay. Because if more of us are saying it's not okay, then they can't silence us, right?
Do
I don't
you
know where I
remember?
read that.
Well, yes, they can.
They could try. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Greg.
Do you remember the illustration he gives about the people in a room, and there, I think 11 people in a room, and then they're asked, the person coming into the room is asked, how many people are in this room? But what that person doesn't know is that the other 10 people in the room have been told to say that there are 12 people in the room. And so inevitably, as all the 10 say that there are 12, the one person who enters the room says that there are 12 people in the room, right? And I'm struck by that because there's two other illustrations. There's the book 1984, and there's this famous episode. I'm a big Star Trek person, where Captain Picard is kidnapped, and he's being asked how many lights are there, and there's clearly 3 lights, but his torturer is telling him there are 4 lights. And right before he is delivered, he gets to a breaking point. And I don't know if he says there are 4 lights, or at the end when he is rescued, he reflects that he was about to say there are 4 lights. And so as human beings, the collective nature of our species and our need to feel in community, and to be in community and to not feel ostracized is so great that to stay in community, we will call things that are not true, that we know that are not true, true, to stay in community, right? And I think as human beings, we have to sit with that tension and find a way to respond that is innately against our nature, right? We need to find some kind of strength to do what it is that everything in us says, I need to stay in this community. And to do that, I need to violate some core beliefs that I have. And that's tough.
Mm.
Never happens at
But
church, does it?
yeah. But I wonder if that's part of, we talk about dehumanizing others, but the tension of, like, for us to be able to dehumanize another person, we also have to look in the mirror and go, am I human enough to not see the humanity in the other person? So it goes both ways. And I think, that is so powerful. yeah, as you were talking, Gregory, I'm just like, but this is the tension that we're all living right now as well, you know. Um, and this is why I think when you talked about, you know, earlier on about having the courage to be the first person that stands up, one of my favorite, and a friend of mine actually reminded me of this. I don't know if you remember a few years back, actually probably more than a few years back, there was this video that kind of made its way around of this guy shirtless out in a picnic in a park, and he's just dancing on his own, and he looks, and all of us who are kind of too cool kids would look at that person and go, man, he is weird, he's weird anyway. But then he just keeps going, and then a few people started to like join him, and a few more, and before you know it, the whole entire park, you know, was filled with people just in joyful, free, dancing. And it takes that kind. When the whole the Palestine, uh, when Gaza and Israel was so live, there was a room full of I guess people in the States, and I can't remember where, and there was a Jewish rabbi who stood up, and her voice shook as she confronted, I think it was Kamala Harris in the room. She was interviewed, and she stood up, and I remembered her voice shaking as she is resisting, and she is pushing back, and everyone around her were asking her to shush, but she kept going. And it's this thing where she is amongst her own people as a Jewish rabbi, and she's being told to shush, but she refuses to, and her voice shook. And I think it's that kind of courage that we've been invited to. And but that's so hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so difficult. But there's this notion of you speak anyhow, even if your knees and your voice shakes. You speak anyhow, you stand up anyhow. And that's kind of a holy courage that we are being invited to.
I want to bring up something that I have so many things I really appreciate about this, and something that I didn't. Uh, and that's, I thought he could have disarmed more, to bring up people's objections for them. He does it so masterfully in so many ways. And, my Jewish friends, after the October 7 massacre, the murders, um, they couldn't sleep. My Jewish lawyer friend Rich said, "We just said, here we go again," and so, uh, El Akkad dedicates one paragraph to that, just one, and it's a very antiseptic appraisal. On October 7th, 2023, armed groups led by Hamas's military wing launched a coordinated attack on multiple cities near the Israeli-occupied Gaza Strip. Fighters killed 1,195 people, of which 815 were civilians, according to analysis by Agence France Presse, including at least 282 women and 36 children. They abducted more than 250 people. It was a bloodbath. And then he says, orchestrated by exactly the kind of entity that thrives in the absence of anything resembling a future. That's it. And I felt that, I thought about writing this book myself. How much play would I have given to that? Why did people get so incensed, so fearful? The state of Israel surrounded on all sides by enemies, feeling that they could be, exterminated instantly in a lot of ways. That's what my friend said to me. He said, "We don't get it. We don't get that. We got somebody who bombs Pearl Harbor or New York City, and we get all up in arms, but we don't really get what Israel went through." And I wanted a little more of kind of getting at acknowledging the horror, the terrible nature of it, and giving it a little more due, and then saying, and that's not enough, because he does that masterfully. Then he goes on and says, the children that are being killed, none of them ever voted for Hamas. That the government in Israel propped up Hamas because they needed them. I mean, he goes in, he's wonderful with that. And I wanted more there. I'll just say it straight up. I wanted more because I felt like it was a little bit dehumanizing the victims there. That's what I felt. Go ahead, push back.
I won't push back. Um, I think he does get into a little more when he talks about some of the investigation that goes on. And he says there was a tension around, and this happens, the fog of war, around actual acts that were committed versus perception of what was done. And some of the justification for the response was the perception of acts that were committed. And so if 10 children were committed, but it was 100 children that were brutalized in a certain way. So we're not bombing and destroying an enemy. We're destroying a people and a group by what we think they could be capable of or what they in fact are capable of, not
Absolutely.
what
Yeah.
they did. And so I
Yeah.
think he does get into that. I see your point that he doesn't go all in, but maybe I would have made a different choice, but I'm a people pleaser, right? So, but given where he sits and that the heinous acts that were committed, particularly the sexual violence,
Yeah.
has created a state of exception to the rules of war, so that bombing children, eviscerating an entire landscape, destroying hospitals, right, is justified, right? And I remember there's a European American scholar, I think he's at Yale, named Timothy Snyder, and he wrote the book on tyranny, which, if you haven't read, is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
But he talks about beware states of exception, emergency power, so rules don't apply,
Yeah.
right? These people are so bad, and he alludes to this throughout the book, the author, that you have to do things differently. When I was in law school, I graduated from law school in 2008, and the speaker of my law school graduation was the sitting attorney general at the time. And there are many people that didn't want him to come because he sat before the United States Congress. Maybe it was during his confirmation hearing, and he testified. And he didn't say what many in the legal community hoped he would say, that the United States should condemn torture, that enhanced interrogation was not really a thing, that you can use language in ways that hide, and that was my favorite chapter because that's a question, right? Hide and pretend that things are something that they in fact are. This is what we were doing. And so he sat there and he came to my graduation and he essentially said that we were, from what I recall, that we didn't understand as lawyers, future lawyers, we would have to represent clients that weren't that potentially were engaged in unsavory acts, and that we were being immature in our condemnation of torture. And I thought that was rich, and I remember thinking, here is this man cloaked with the enormous sense of power. He was a federal judge. He had amassed this enormous resume. And when he made that speech, I lost all respect for him. I
Yeah.
thought he was a small person, and all the pedigree he had, the titles he had, the Secret Service that stood there, it meant nothing, right? And I think that is one of the things, the core arguments, maybe he alludes to it, that as human beings, we sell our souls so short for things here. I mean, his argument, I'm not sure I buy it, that one day everyone will think this is wrong. Maybe that's a tension for me, um, given the cost, economic and otherwise. Um, but I do think that is a tension here, particularly when you look in the spiritual aspect, that we will sell ourselves for what? You know, the pleasure, connection to things that don't matter.
I hear you, Chris, about your observation. And I think what comes up is this book feels more like memoir to me than anything else.
Yeah.
And there is a level of grief that he is articulating in a way that he's processing just his own family's trajectory as North Africans who had to move and immigrate to Canada. And it almost feels like if it wasn't for the grace of God, there go I. He could have been being a Palestinian person who was actually sitting navigating what the real time and what is happening there. And so I think um, what came up for me in your critique was Ilan Pape's book, right? He writes a very it's called a very short man I lost it a very short history of Israel, and I think when I listen to his book, it really there's this attempt to try to see both sides. When you're the one, or when your grief is that palpable, right? It was written the perspective that is written from. He acknowledged that what was done. He acknowledged it, right? And so yes, it's short, and it could have been more. Yet the book was about someday we're going to look back at all the things that are happening and we're going to say, man, that was terrible, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to say someday. Right now, this is the day that I want to name that what is happening is terrible and what are we going to do about it. So I think I was comfortable with that, um, with not centering.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for
Because
centering. Yeah,
I didn't think you were. I'm just speaking to the fact that there is this. We can't have. You've heard me make this comment before. If I'm the one that's being injured and I'm bleeding right now, and you want me to think about the person who did the injury to me, yeah, I don't know that you're gonna get that from me.
ah,
You know what I'm saying? I'm just like my foot hurts. Like you stepped on my foot 3 days ago. My foot still hurts. You're not asking me how my foot's doing, but you want me to think about the person, to think about, well, maybe they tripped by accident. That's just maybe I'm simplifying it too much. So I'm going to stop talking right now and allow other people to
no,
come.
no, it's a good point. And the point is also that that's the argument that's made by the Israeli government. They say, you hurt, I got hurt. Don't be talking about these other people. They use the same argument. They don't want the palpable grief coming out in the news of Palestinians. Uh, it's there. We just spent some time talking about how the paradox. The closer we get to truth, the closer we get to paradox. That we are all alike and we are all different at the same time. And pointing out both is good on occasion. I hesitated even to bring that up, except that, as Gregory pointed out, for somebody who is related to somebody or read up or is Jewish, and you give that short shrift to what happened, they're going to write off the whole book. I see them doing that. I don't think it's justified to do that, and I would have written it differently. Hey, let me talk about something that really I loved as a journalist. This There were a lot of things I loved, but this Fox News is page 39. Fox News is an entity that more than any other has normalized the practice of severing any relationship between the truth and what one wishes the truth to be. Oh man, That's gold. it's there's a severing between the truth and what one wishes the truth to be. That whole wish fulfillment coming in there. Uh, in almost every major newspaper, next page, the journalist cannot be an activist. Yet journalism at its core is one of the most activist endeavors there is. A reporter is supposed to agitate against power, against privilege, against the slimy wall of press releases and PR nothing speak that has come to protect every major business and government boardroom ever since Watergate. A reporter is supposed to agitate against silence. Ooh, I love that.
I love you sharing that quote, which then begs me to ask the question, if the reporters are silenced, then who speaks?
That's it.
Morons on the internet.
My Lord.
You know, that's a tension, because journalistic ethics mean that there's integrity, there's a search for truth, there's a thoroughness that goes into production. There's correction when there's error. Um, there's a professional collegiality, right? There's all of those things that create like this product where people want to attach their name to it. But who will speak? Okay, we live in this social media age, so we can all turn on a camera right now and we can speak to the world.
Hey,
But
we're doing it.
yes, but we don't have those journalistic ethics around us. And so the question and the truth and the product that we're disseminating to people, what is the basis for people's reliance on that product? There's this book I I can look it up, I'll share it in the chat later on, where it says we live in this incredible age of all of this information and all this
Mhm.
ability to access truth, but we are incredibly credulous. So people will believe all manner of absurdity, but when confronted with the clear facts and the truth that sometimes is easy, verifiable, they will not believe. So here, where I live close in DC, we had the Pizzagate issue. It's a pizza place I've been to once. It's next to a store I go to occasionally, where a young man believed that, you know, leftist blood drinkers were there in the basement torturing kids, and Hillary Clinton was at the head
Yep.
of this cabal. And he drove here up to this region with a gun. And, the New York Times interviewed him when he was there, and he went into the pizza shop frequented by families in, I think, Northwest DC, and he was brandishing a weapon, and there's no basement there. Um, and he was incredibly credulous about that. And, had he done more research, he could have found out those things. But whatever rabbit hole and access to information he had took him down that dark road. And tragically, um, a few months ago, he actually lost his life with an encounter with the police. I don't know what
Wow.
happened there later on and how long he was incarcerated for, but this was a young man, certainly younger than I am. I'm 45 now, um, who had a family and children. And this goes into the tension where people can commit heinous acts or do wrong things, but they do not lose their humanity. I mean, the core aspect of their humanity, their lives have value. I remember years ago, I saw dramatized, and then, I'll cede the floor because I'm speaking a lot, where an interaction between Nelson Mandela and the apartheid government took place. And there was, the apartheid government was asking for assurances. And Mandela, at least in the dramatized version, I'm actually reading his autobiography right now, audiobooking it. So maybe I'll get there. He says, well, what assurances? We've seen the kind of power that you've exercised and what it's done to you. Look at the acts that you have committed. We do not want to be like you,
Mm.
right? Um, and the last thing I'll say on this is there's a fantastic discussion that takes place between Trevor Noah and Ta-Nehisi Coates after Ta-Nehisi Coates goes to Israel,
Hmm.
um, and he writes a book. But there's also interesting discussion that takes place between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein, and they have the discussion the same week, and you can listen to them in podcasts, and it's fascinating. Ta-Nehisi Coates' his perspective, and Ezra Klein as a Jew. It's a great, rich discussion that informs this.
I'm thinking of Ignacio Martin Barro, who was in El Salvador. He was a priest psychologist, and he talks about very much the same, similar thing around what happens when the um, journalists are silenced, right? When you can no longer have journalistic ethics guiding what is printed, then the persons who print, they print what they want to print, which leads to the dehumanization of folks, which then leads to the death of people. And the ones who typically get hurt the most are the most vulnerable, women and children.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that El Akkad is calling us to see now. That, like, this isn't new. This isn't a new playbook, right? Like, all of us are looking elsewhere, but this is not a new playbook. We need to be looking to, I think, what can we do? What should we be doing? I see there's a question that popped up.
Yeah. But I wonder if just before that, Dr. Dillis, the idea about journalists being silent, but when they do speak and the language that they use, how that actually fuels what is currently happening. And one of the things that he points out is about the Western media is the fact that when they do speak and how they use language, they use it in a passive construction, that when Palestinians are killed, they say people died, versus active language where Israelis are harmed, Hamas murdered them. So there is kind of this interesting play on language and what is used when they do actually speak. And it's so interesting. At the beginning of this year, there was a writers, speaking of journalists and kind of the arts community, one of the professors that is quite vocal in her critique of Israel, Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah here in Australia, who was invited to go to a writers' festival. It's one of the most prominent writers' festival here in Australia, and it was held in South Australia. But then they ended up disinviting her, and how the community, the writers community in Australia actually, like, over 180 of writers boycotted the festival, and they ended up canceling the festival. Like, that was massive, because, and this was their exercise of solidarity, and this is them as artists, as writers and authors and journalists, stood with her, and they ended up having to, cancel the whole entire thing. And I think this is where, when we think about the use of power and the use of platforms, this is where it matters, anyway. And I was just thinking about that as we were having that discussion, about journalists silence, but when they do speak, the language, the headlines that they use, it's intentional. You either use it to say, like, use the same language, or one group of people are murdered and the other group of people, they're just dying, not mentioning the fact that they've just been obliterated, family trees
Right.
gone,
We
murdered.
sanitize the violence.
Yeah.
It's enhanced interrogation, it's collateral damage. They're detainees. Nobody dies. They're just collateral damage.
Yep.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, as a lawyer, we're taught to be very precise with language, but we are presumed to know that the language that we're using, right? Rather, we use language in very deliberate ways. So the use of passive voice and active voice. And when I was a teacher, I would tell them about using law language as a lawyer. And so, for example, if I'm a prosecutor, I will say the defendant, Gregory, killed that man, and we are here to hold him accountable. But if I'm a defense attorney, I'm going to say, now we know that that man was killed. It's terrible, terrible that he was killed.
Yeah.
Now we don't know how it happened. We know that he died. We know that they don't have the gun. We know that there's a lot of speculation here today about the events that happened. And we mourn the fact that he was killed. But that's it. So the actors are hidden. And so the deliberate choice to hide actors by people who profess to adhere to particular ethics are choices. And those choices matter. And to a receiving public that is not aware often of those choices, that discernment. So lawyers are presumed, at least in American law and American ethics, to be able to manipulate people. And so there are guardrails around the nature of our advertising and what we can and cannot do. And there's agreements that we have with our clients, right, to give them a certain level of transparency and agency. But the public doesn't have that when it's consuming a product. So, Chris, you're pointing out that section about what Fox News is. A couple of years ago, Tucker Carlson was taken to task in litigation for something he said. And his lawyers at Fox, I think when he was at Fox, argued that he wasn't a journalist.
That's right.
Opinionist. No one could presume that he was speaking facts, that he should be, but that's the problem. Everyone did assume.
That's right.
Telling the truth.
It's entertainment.
Yes.
It's entertainment. Right.
And the inability for a public to discern between entertainment, manipulation, right, demagoguery, and truth telling.
It's brain rot.
Yes, there's a lot of that.
Yes.
And how we see ourselves, I think he does a great job on talking about the American self-image here on 83. American self-image demands a narrative in which his country plays the role of the rebel, the resistance, when at the same time every shred of contemporary evidence around him leads to the conclusion that by scope and scale and purpose of violence, this country is clearly the empire. And then he gets to this. The nation's dominant cultural forces, from Monday Night Football to the Country Music Awards to the entirety of AM radio, it's the person who, in self-image, professes to be a rule breaker, untamable, wild, and in the next breath sides unquestionably with every facet of state power. Ooh, that's good stuff. And when I say good stuff, let me be clear. That's good writing.
Yes,
Yeah.
I picked up
We know
on
what
that.
you mean.
That is, we know what you mean. That's really good writing. That's really
that's
thoughtful.
horrific in real life, but good writing. Yeah.
So as I'm looking at our time, y'all, I'm wondering if we could start thinking about how we want to close our time together. And there was a question that was posed: is El Akkad asking us to? Is he just exposing corruption and complicit behavior, or is he asking us to do something, or or both? Is there something he's asking us to do, or is he just exposing us?
Well, he's not selling T-shirts, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's asking us to do something, and the way he's asking us to do something in my mind is not by saying, go do something like this. And that's why I love the title of the book and the tension, as you've been naming, Gregory, that exists from the beginning of the book to the end of the awakening, because that's where he takes us, right? He wants there to be an awakening. And I love the play as we get to the end of the chapter, end of the book, about one day there will be, one day there will be, one day there will be. And what I sense him asking is, could this be the day? So I think that he's both exposing, showing us our complicity, and also leaving us with the responsibility to make a decision
That's right.
about what we will do today. I don't know what's
Yeah.
coming up for you all.
Yes, it's both and.
Yeah, I was just about to say I love the both and.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
But I also, yeah, and I guess, yeah, like you're saying that we're wrapping up. It is confronting in a way that is not crippling, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and I think it is really interesting that it's confronting in that it's overwhelming, because the reality is it's overwhelming. The world right now overwhelms and it's exhausting, but almost to the point where he's also saying, yes, today's the day, but be of good courage, like
Mm-hmm.
continue to do the work kind of tone.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though I said at the beginning, what surprised me is this that almost comes through the book, and because I listened to his voice and the way that he is reflective, this reflective tone came through, but there was also this level of hopefulness that the work continues, and how he takes time to go to his writing studio in, and I think also because he's in Oregon, and I'm like, of course you're in Oregon, writing from
But
some
come on.
Oregon, and I'm like, okay, I get to home, out of the home.
Oh, could be
um,
Minnesota. Minnesota,
I could have,
Minnesota stood up.
Yeah, they
uh,
did.
yeah, so it definitely, yes, yes, and yes. Mm.
I agree. I mean, it's pretty eye-opening for me. And Dillis's reference to it being a mirror, I think, is one. And then one takeaway is when he talks about the sand, he quotes someone saying, the sand, throw some sand in the machinery of genocide, even if it's
Mhm.
just a sand, something,
Mhm.
right? Um, and then the idea of looking back. I have a book called Aftermath, Life in the Fallout of the Third Reich. And there's sections in there where it talks about that their children, let's see if I can find the quote, condemned the actions of their parents. He says, seldom in history has a generational conflict been waged with more bitterness, rage, and self-righteousness than that of the young German people of 1968 against their parents.
Oof.
Um, because they had to look back and look at the stain that you've left on us by what you did and didn't do, by what you said and didn't say. And that generation, there was so much. And the author Timothy Snyder gets into this, of people who said they didn't know, they weren't a part of it, they didn't. And I think history has reflected that many people knew, right? But they counted the cost and they said, well, okay.
That's right.
And that's a perfect segue into what really like kind of hit home with me uh, when he discussed the forced neutrality in reporting when something is clearly immoral. Um, a lot of reporters, journalists, you know, the idea that you must remain neutral all the time, I call BS on that. And that applies to me too. I have colleagues here who still think that they need to be neutral in every single issue that comes up. And No. When things are wrong, you can pick a side. You need to pick a side. Jesus didn't stay neutral. He flipped tables. He called out what was wrong, and we can too, and we should. You can't stay neutral on a moving train.
There's this historian that I own a couple of his books and I listen to his podcast. His name is Jamar Tisby. And he has a T-shirt called "Justice Takes Sides."
Mm,
You know,
yep.
and that's very sobering for me as a person who's a people pleaser. And I usually am put in a position where I try to reconcile groups, reconcile ideas. But I remember one of my classmates in law school confronted me, um, and he was like, "Listen, Greg, you can't always do that.
Nope.
Sometimes there's not a way to reconcile the tension. Sometimes you're
Some
on this side, and
yeah.
you have to oppose that side."
You have to have the courage to make people mad at you and be okay with that.
I do that all the time with Dillis.
How dare. Dillis, who makes the greatest playlists of all time.
There you go. Hey, I got a quote. It's from this book, Imagine Life. I can't remember the author's name, but Desmond Tutu, yeah, a famous quote: "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor.
That's right.
If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." I love that quote. I also love there on 62 when Akkad says, when it mattered, who sided with justice and who sided with power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep seeing, placards or pictures of placards, at protests that says the quote of, if you want to know what you would have done, or something along the lines of, if you want to know what you would have done during the Holocaust, now you know.
Yeah.
And that's, it's so simple and yet so powerful, because we reflect on the genocide in Rwanda. We reflect on on the Holocaust. And it's interesting that the Holocaust is the one that we keep at the history books and teach, right? To be
Because
something.
we weren't the ones doing the murders.
Yeah.
So it's okay
Yeah,
to
right.
talk about that one.
Right. And so we reflect on that and go, what, how could they allow that? And it's also really interesting that at that time, as many people did know, but they didn't have to watch a live genocide on their screen.
Word.
And it's also fascinating to me that somehow, some way, the people who are literally going through this, who are filming their own annihilation, and yet we're not believing them. So imagine, that it's only when a particular commentator or a particular journalist, a particular, news platform, it is only when they get to say, hey, this is a genocide, or this is what's happening, that we somehow believe them over the people who are watching their children, or picking up the pieces of their children, bodies of their children, pieces, put it in a plastic bag to say, this is my child, and yet we still do not have the capacity to believe them. So that's really fascinating, and I think so confronting on so many levels. And we're having to live with that. We are living with that right now.
And it paralyzes us sometimes, doesn't it, Moe? Because now we are in touch with pain and suffering from all over the world instantly on our doorstep. So it's not just not just Gaza, it's Sudan, it's Ukraine, it's all over the world. So what do we do with that? With that, so that we're not paralyzed. I used to say to my students, I don't know if you remember this, Marcia, please don't try to change the world. You will go mad. Change your world.
Yeah.
Change your world. And I think that's what this book is about. When he says at the end, just as it has always been possible to look away, it is always possible to stop looking away. That's some courage to do that as well, to stay balanced. And the the sign that I'm holding up at resistance rallies, now that I can walk again, is the truth bats last. I love that. The truth bats last.
Not bats, but
No,
bats.
I know you thought of
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how it's going to come out here. Birds are real and the truth bats last. Right.
Mm-hmm.
How about let's wrap it up here in the next about 3 minutes, okay?
Oh man.
One of the takeaways I have just goes to this idea of, I think Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about this, the circle of concern and the circle of influence. And so our circle of influence, our circle of concern is going to be large, because of the technological age we live in. We have access to so much information.
Yeah.
And it's just, you can get flooded with all the things that are going on, flooded into passivity. But our circle of influence, the proximity, the lives that we're close to, the people that we touch, the volunteer opportunities,
Yep.
the protests we can attend. I attended my first kind of protest a couple of weeks ago. It was very strange for me, and I wasn't the only first timer there, and those things that you can touch, right? I think create power,
Yep.
strength. Whereas too much time spent in the circle of concern creates impotence and frustration. So I think the takeaway for me from the book is to spend more time in the influence. And I'll end with this quote from the book, or I'll just reference because we don't have time. It's in my favorite chapter, language. Allowed to wield silence so freely, any institution will become insatiable. It's not only the absence of information allows those complicit in, but unaffected by wrongdoing to look away. The silence itself becomes an empty canvas onto which any fantasy can be painted. When every last Palestinian journalist has been killed, maybe there will never have been any Palestinian journalist.
Yeah.
And so I think speaking, proximately, helps to erode that silence.
Yep. Moy and Marcia, why don't you give us some final comments here as we're leaving?
I think in the spirit of change your world, tell someone they're important to God today.
Yeah. I think practice relational courage.
Yep.
Starts, again, in our circle of influence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think don't give in to the exhaustion and then the overwhelm, because joy still exists. I went and saw the film, The Voice of Hind Rajab, the little girl that was in the car and talking to first responders.
5-year-old. Yeah.
Afterward, a friend that invited me to go see this with her, and afterward we were in silence, and she said to me, "Do you want ice cream?" And I know it sounds so bizarre because both her and I, we both looked at each other like, what a privilege. This is the space of privilege, right? We can watch something so sobering, but for us to be able to process, we had to process that over gelato, you know? And I think the coexistence of joy and heartache is very real. So don't give into, the overwhelm and the fear, but still continue to have moments of joy so that we can continue to do the work.
Joy is necessary, permitted.
Yeah. And hopefulness.
Infrastructure. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all who joined us on this. We're going to sign off now at the top of the hour. God bless you. Yeah, we do recommend this book. It is, I can tell you from experience, it is not a great bedtime read because it is horrific in spots. And it is a great read, nevertheless. So please don't turn away. Give it a look. Thanks again from Just Love Collective. We appreciate it. God bless you.